Welcome to the show, the podcast that dives into the battles women fight on the front lines and within. I'm your host, Olivia Nunn, and this series is proudly sponsored by Mill Mentor, the military community's largest on-demand mentorship network built by veterans, for veterans, and their families. From job support to networking, find your mentor at millmentor.com. Now let's dive into today's episode where resilience, service, and strength take center stage. This is Women of War, and I'm here with Colonel Retired Edna Cummings. And if you recognize that name, it's because of the amazing work that she's done with 688. But before we even get to that part, we have to start from the beginning. So with all that and her illustrious career in the United States Army, which is the best military force ever, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So you've done a lot. I mean, making Colonel, which is 06 for those that don't know, that's a pretty big deal. I mean, rising through the ranks, accomplishing what you've done, and then at the same time serving after you got out. But before we get to the very end, we have to start at the beginning. What made you decide to jump into the Army? Why the Army?
Why not? I was born in the Army. My dad was stationed at 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, and that's where I was born. And so I like to tell people that I joined the family business. So it's just something I grew up with. And one thing about being around the military, living on military installations, I saw a few women in, but I didn't see a lot. But I thought, wow, if I could figure out how to survive in that type of environment, the rest of my life would be a piece of cake. So it was just, for the challenge and adventure, opportunity to travel and just look at it from a different perspective. I've always been curious. So that was the beginning of my military career, by being born into it.
So when you told your parents that you were going to join, what did they say?
My dad said, absolutely not. Yeah. And the thing about it, he just passed a couple of months ago at 98 years old. And he had served in World War II occupation force. That means he enlisted in 1946 and was serving overseas, but he was aware of the stereotypes of women in the military. It was the Women's Army Corps at the time. And he just did not want me to have to go through that, because based on my research with the 688, all women, regardless of race, had the same challenges. Just why would a self-respecting woman want to join the military? But when I told him that I could become an officer and go to college at the same time, he acquiesced.
It seems like a lot of parents are either totally for the military or they say, no way. Because my dad was, you're not going to enlist, you can be an officer. He said those same things to me. But for you, you talked about the stigma around women joining. What was that like for you when you first came in? What was that stigma like, and what were the obstacles or the barriers that you first encountered when you joined the Army? But before that, I'm sorry to hear about your father. Condolences to you and your family.
You. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was my muse. And the more I learned about his military service, I learned more, I guess, once I retired, because I think I had the time, and he talked a little bit more about it. But joining the Army when I did, I have a confession. I actually joined the Women's Army Corps. The Women's Army Corps was not disbanded until the year that I graduated from college, and that was 1978. So I graduated and got my commission in May, and the Women's Army Corps was disbanded that October. But when I started college in 1974, that was the year women got credit cards. And it was still the Women's Army Corps. So it was an environment where you are separate and you're not equal because you're here to serve the men. So that was the basic idea of the Women's Army Corps, to free a man up for combat. It was true from the inception of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, then the Women's Army Corps in 1942 and 43, until the 70s when I joined. And, the unrestricted positions just recently opened up, this past decade. So it was a lot of, I guess, curiosity when I joined because a lot of the troops didn't know that Black women officers existed. Uh, in my book, I chuckle when I think, I never forget one of my privates says, "Ma'am, I didn't know they made y'all." I'm like, well, y'all? He says, yeah, black women, a Black woman officer. I was a second lieutenant, 21, 22 years old. So being in the military at that age is challenging enough, but I was a novelty, and women like me were novelties. Women were still novelties because they had started putting us into regular units and not just separate female-only units at that time.
You know, I have so many questions because you've lived a different, path than I did when I came in 2001, and you are completely a trailblazer, amazing trailblazer, and I just can't wait to dig in. You talked about joining at a time where women didn't even have the right to have a credit card, and women just weren't really part of the military, and here you are entering the military as a career. You're a leader because you're a second lieutenant. Talk to me, what was that like? Because I just think back when I was in 2001, and I'm like, I'm a platoon leader and I've got my own job, I've got my own career, I could drive my own car. Like, there's really no one that's going to tell me no. The only thing that was restricted to me were the combat arms positions, but other than that, you know I was supposed to be there. I can't imagine what it was for you. I would just love for you to dig into that. What was a day in the life of Second Lieutenant Edna Cummings back when she first joined in terms of what was it like when you showed up and how they treated you? What did they say? I mean, you talked about it being a novelty, but I just want to know.
Now a reason why when I wrote my book, I laughed a lot when I think about it, because my first assignment after completing the initial training, the Army ROTC program was fine. Academic community, everybody moved forward together. The men, the staff, everyone in the ROTC department was great. Officer Basic course was interesting. I'll start there at Fort Lee, Virginia. And what was interesting about that, we had academic courses with the men, but when it was time for formation, we had our separate formations. We had other Women Army Corps officers, the WACs, who made sure our hair was appropriate. And I guess they were teaching us how to be ladies in the military. So they inspected us as women, making sure we complied and did not do anything that was too extreme as a woman, more so as a soldier. But my first assignment was Fort Rucker. And Fort Rucker, Alabama, is the home of Army aviation. And even though women could not be in combat arms, frontline fighting positions, I was attached to a combat arms unit that had a mission with the 82nd Airborne, and it was a refueling unit. So I'd gone to quartermaster school, and there was a separate POL petroleum track. I didn't go through that. I went through what was called warehousing or general supply. But I didn't even know where my own fuel tank was in my car, but I was responsible for tactical refueling of helicopters. I mean, I didn't have to fly, in the helicopters or anything. We had to do these tactical refueling sites for students attending flight school. And that was interesting because this was post-Vietnam. So there are a lot of Vietnam-era veterans who had never worked around women. And you mentioned being platoon leader. Now, your platoon leader, has a right arm, your platoon sergeant. And that person is supposed to lead, guide, mentor you, navigate. None of them wanted to work with me. So I went through platoon sergeants like every 2 months. They had no idea how to work with me. They were afraid to talk to me. And they just disengaged. So I was just kind of out there floundering. That's how I felt. Some of the other NCOs stepped in, but it was frustrating for me because every 60 days I would rotate out a platoon sergeant. I fired a couple and maybe one just asked to be reassigned. I'm not sure, but I know every 60 days I went through a platoon sergeant. So that's kind of destabilizing when you have the expectation that you would have a right arm to lead, guide, train, mentor you. As an officer, as a second lieutenant, you rely on your NCOs, but I did not have a platoon sergeant that I could rely on. And so that was the hardest part, because platoon sergeant sets the tone for the platoon, for the rest of the unit. And the platoon, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, it could be anywhere from 20 to maybe 40 people. So I think I probably had maybe 25 or 30. I'm not quite sure. But that was, I guess, the biggest challenge, that destabilizing environment where I had the expectation I would learn the basics. So I relied on other NCOs and made it through okay. And I kept that assignment for maybe a year and a half. But that was a rude awakening that a lot of what we learn in military training and courses is theory, because you really have to be able to navigate these environments that are somewhat complex once you actually get to your duty station.
You know, there's one part, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were the first African American woman that commissioned at your university, Appalachian State University, correct?
Yes.
So you started with a lot of first already, and then this milestone and this idea of maybe not saying a unicorn per se, but being different, right? You that was in your career right off. You talk about how these platoon sergeants didn't want to work with you for whatever reason, whether they were afraid to say something wrong, or just because they didn't want to work with women because they were sexist, or they were racist, or maybe a combination of the both. I can't imagine what that must have been like in terms of how you wanted to grow as a young leader, and where you saw yourself in those young days. Did you ever in those moments look at yourself and say, I'm going to stick this through, and one day I'm going to make it to the top, and that top's going to be lieutenant colonel or even a general officer? I'm curious as to what your thought was in those young moments as a second lieutenant.
Yeah, since it wasn't not that long ago, I'm sure I can recall some of those thoughts from yesteryear. But my first thought was, okay, I don't want to quit. So I always look for the escape. And being a second lieutenant is hard enough. I don't care where you are. I mean, it's a challenge. But I learned to expect hard. I had no aspirations of making a career out of the military, not at all. And I just figured, my dad had retired, and so I would call him a lot. He used this term joker. So you tell those jokers, he would give me the language. And so I wouldn't say my dad said, but I did talk about him a lot. And one of the troops, I'll never forget, says, she acts like that her father's running this unit. So I would tell my father's war stories. But there were some good moments. I did learn a lot. I think I learned resilience and how to be self-sufficient. And that second lieutenant position lasted about, I guess, a year and a half. And I got the next assignment. I became a executive officer for an air traffic control company at Fort Rucker. And that was a little bit more professional, because there are a lot of women going through we call it the ATC course at the time. So in the other unit, I was attached to a combat-heavy engineer unit, a lot of Vietnam era veterans. I'll never forget, I had a captain in the unit who had accepted the rank of sergeant because of a huge rift in a lot of the pilots. There was an excess of pilots, so he just resigned his commission and stayed in as an enlisted person so he can get his retirement. And I could just see, I guess, they were battle worn. And in retrospect, I understand that at the time. And with regards to being first, I like to quote the 6888 Commander Charity Adams, who led the unit overseas. She says, you don't know you're making history until somebody tells you that it's history. When I graduated from Appalachian, I had no idea that I was the first. I didn't care. I just wanted to make it to, number one, get that degree and to get that commission. I mean, after all, a woman in the late 70s joining the military as an officer. I just thought that would just really give me the tools I needed. And I don't think I ever thought about making a career of the military. And I actually got out after an assignment overseas. I decided to get married and have kids and live happily ever after. And I did all of that, but life changes. My husband died unexpectedly. And I had to come back to what was comfortable, what was welcoming. And I had the opportunity to come back on active duty. So I weighed my civilian options and my military options. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to stick with what I know.
It's funny that you talked about how you would call your dad for advice, because I used to do that a lot too. My dad was in the Army when I was a kid. He did 12 years. He was a combat engineer, and he was enlisted.
Oh, wow.
And I would call him, and I would be like, Dad, these guys, and he's like, you just got to do this, and you got to say this, and don't take this for no, and
That's
make
right.
sure, you check on behind that. And there were times that, my soldiers would be like, how does she know this?
Exactly.
How does she know where to check? And I'm like, I have a secret. I can't.
I call our fathers, right? Yes.
But you also talk about this interesting, switch where you came in. It was a different world for you, and you had to learn and adjust, and you had all these obstacles. But then at the same time, when life threw you another curveball, the military ended up being something that you knew, a family, a safe place, if you will. And so you came back to service. You ended up, serving and seeing so much change through the military from the time that you served until the time that you retired. What were some of the big moments that when you look back in your career, and especially as a woman, as a minority woman who served, that you just look back and you're just like, man, I'm so proud that I got to serve and I got to wear a uniform and be part of that tapestry?
This is not so much as being a woman of color. I remember when the uniforms changed. They changed several times, especially with the women. One time we had these bright green two-piece outfits that looked like Girl Scout uniforms. And so it seems like the Army didn't know what to do with the women with regards to uniform. And I was in the Army when women officers, we could wear the stripe down our pants alongside the pants on the outside. And that may not seem like a big deal, but that was something that the men could do. The officers would have a black stripe on the outside of their pants. So if you didn't see the rank, you saw the pants, you knew they were officers. And when women could do that, I remember a group of us like, wow, we can wear the stripes too now. And that was like, okay. It's odd that I remember something that seemed so insignificant in terms of a shift. But the longer I stayed in, I saw the shift of oneness because positions started opening up. I started getting assignments that were not traditionally female. Sitting like at the Pentagon, for example, in the operations center. The operations and training environments were normally all male, but I may have been the only female in there, but then I said, okay, I am here because there's something that someone believes that I could do. And I think with the support of the leadership, when I was at Fort Rucker, I had the brigade commander, Doc Bonst, I'll never forget him. He reminded me, he was an aviator, and at that time, aviation wasn't a separate branch. It was a specialty, or a skill. So he was also a tanker, armor, and he was a Patton clone. And to look at him, he was terrifying. But this guy this 06 brigade commander knew what I was up against. And so what he would do when I would be, in a meeting or something, he would make it a point to say hello, speak to me. And I call it just giving me that top cover and said, look, if you need me, call me, you can do this. And he would tell me sometimes that you're too nice. You need to get a little bit meaner if you want to survive, this Army. But I stayed in touch with them for years. And so each assignment seems like there was someone of a position of power who knew that I had the potential or could do what I was assigned to do. I wasn't there as an affirmative action hire, as they used to call it back then. I wasn't there as a token. I was there because I was qualified. And because of that support that I received throughout my career from primarily, white male officers, because they were the ones in power, I think that really gave me, I guess, some confidence as, okay, he is telling me to get off the pity party. Yeah, you have it hard, suck it up, figure it out. You got this. So that's what I appreciate, even in my last assignment at Northcom, Colorado Springs. The 4-star general was like that. And I'll never forget, he spoke in a whisper. He never yelled or screamed, but, it was Air Force. But he would just approach me with all of his cadres, just this, hello, how are you doing? I'm like, oh my God, why is he talking to me? Because everyone was looking like, well, what the heck is he doing talking to her? And my boss said, what did the general say? He's just said hello. But it just let me know that in a way, they could tell I was the only one. I was a unicorn, just to acknowledge my presence, to say, you're not invisible. And so I think just throughout my career, there was always someone who recognized that I belonged there. And of course, I had to do my part, not fall out of a run, make sure I show up on time, just do what you're supposed to and go above and beyond, as most of us try to do. And so I appreciate that I had support who respected my abilities.
We're going to take a break and take a word from our sponsor. But when we come back, I want to shift gears and go into what your life was after service.
Okay.
Mil Mentor is the military community's largest on-demand mentorship network built by veterans. You pick your own mentor and as many as you like from over 1,000. Whether you're a military spouse looking for resume help, or maybe you're a veteran looking to build your network, or look for a company because you are about to transition. Whatever it may be, or maybe you're starting a business, there are recruiters, executives, and professionals across fields waiting to help you. Sign up as a mentor or mentee at milmentor.com. So you had this amazing career, and you talked about some leaders that were advocates for you, who provided you top cover, who showed you how to be a great leader, and you finished out as an 06, as a colonel in the United States Army, and you decided, I'm not done yet. While I'm hanging up my uniform, my story's not done. And you really got into some advocacy, some storytelling, and just digging into something that was incredible. I'm talking about here about the 6888. And in doing so, you were also awarded in 2023 as a trailblazer from the Department of Veterans Affairs, in which actually you and I were actually co-workers
exactly.
together.
I was as were you, so yes.
And it just amazes me in how when someone with passion, tenacity, and just the want to know, and saying, I'm not going to let this go because that people should know this. The world gets to enjoy the fruit of your labor. Now the world gets to know about the 6888. So tell me, why 6888? How did you land at the 6888? What led you to that story? There's so many more stories I feel like we haven't uncovered, but how did you come upon the 6888?
That's a very good question. It's amazing. It was just by coincidence. When I retired, I worked as a federal contractor for different companies, and for service contracts, not products, just primarily government services type contracts. And then I decided to go in business for myself. Well, I helped small businesses get into the federal space by helping them with the bid and proposal process. And I'm not sure, it's probably 2015, 2016. I was reading online about a Black woman colonel named Edna, who eventually led this fantastic unit of Black women. They were not all African American, but they were all Black. Some, were from the U.S. territories. But, and she had a way about being very direct and saying things that she wished she would not have said, like telling a general over my dead body. Now, I never said over my dead body, because majors don't talk to generals like that under any circumstances. But there were times where I had to stand up for myself or for my troops. And sometimes you're regarded as the one who's the disruptor or the troublemaker. But when you know something needs to be said, you just have a way of saying it. It's like we'll all suffer the consequences. And of course, her name was Charity Edna Adams. So a Black female colonel named Edna, who had some of the same challenges that I did, different era, but same challenges. She put up with people, fellow soldiers and officers not saluting her, getting the idea of questioning, why did she belong? Why are you sent here? Who do you think you are? You need to stay in your place. So she was a disruptor. So that story connected with me. And when I read about her story, I said, if I have the opportunity to do something to honor this woman, I will. So in 2018, I was online with this organization called The Rocks. It's a professional development organization. And they were raising funds for a monument. I'm like, oh my God, this is the 6888. I said, if I had the opportunity to do something, I'm going to do it. So I joined the monument fundraising team, and the 6888 monument is at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, home of the Buffalo Soldiers. That was the first Black unit post-Civil War. So it's in this Buffalo Soldier Park that honors African-American first, but also to include a Civil War general, white general, General Grierson, who led a Buffalo soldier unit. So we raised funds, but as we were doing that, it required storytelling. And we connected with the families of the 6888. It's about, I think, 11 living at the time. And to help raise money, we started telling stories. We started telling their stories. We would have events just to talk about the 6888 or just wherever we could. And the 6888 veterans would be there, and it became a natural curiosity about this part of history no one ever knew about. And while we were doing the fundraising, a filmmaker, Jim Ferris, who was also a veteran, had produced this documentary about the Hello Girls. The Hello Girls, World War I telephone operators who helped Jill Pershing put the calls through. And when they came back from the war, the Army said they were never soldiers. So similar stories about women who were never appreciated, but they restored vital communications when the nation needed during World War I, World War II. So Jim Ferris says, hey, let's pull together a documentary. I think we can do this. And that's what happened. We did a documentary. We allowed the women to tell their stories. We thought that would be most effective. And one thing we noticed, there were no victims. The focus was serving the nation, making sure we won the war, taking care of the troops. I mean, that was it. And of course, the educational benefits that comes along with being in the military post-war. And that was the focus. And none of these women were victims. They were excited, said, yeah, of course, but we had a bigger mission. So they did not let some of the isms, the racism, the sexism, and the other challenges during that time get in the way of serving their country. And that just was so powerful. And while we were doing the documentary, we decided to try for a Congressional Gold Medal. And in my book that was published by University of Virginia Press, the working title of my book was The Odds Ain't Good, but the good stuff happens. But the publisher didn't like that because stepping back, when I started college, less than 10% of African Americans were in college. When I made 06, less than 5% of a cohort group of military officers in the Army, regardless of race or gender, will make 06. And then with getting legislation through Congress, at that time, less than 3% of all bills would even make it to the president's desk of thousands and thousands of pieces of legislation and resolutions. So the odds were not in my favor, but the passion for these women and listening to the stories and the humility and just the attitude of saying it's not a big deal, we were just doing our jobs. And it just resonated with so many people. So we decided to go and at least try to approach members of Congress. And of course, the we meant me. So I led that effort, drafted legislation, something I'd never done, but a good Army officer, first thing you do, you look for a template. give me a template, just give me a format, I'll figure it out. And someone said to me, one of my friends said, I do not want to work with Congress. It's for all the reasons without overstating the obvious. But he's a general officer, at the time he was. He says, how would you feel if you didn't do it? So that stuck with me. At least try. Life is hard. Yeah, working with Congress is hard. It's all hard. If it was easy, everyone would do it. But there's a reason, far beyond our comprehension, that you have this passion. So just go for it and see what happens. And relying on the military experience is like, hey, we don't have failures, we have learning experiences, but you at least try. If you fail, that means you tried. So that's pretty much how I got started.
I love the fact that you didn't back down, even though it was going to be challenging and the odds weren't in your favor. But you just knew that you just had to finish this through. And in the end, people from all over the world get to hear about 6888 and their amazing mission and what they've had to, sacrifice for and overcome. So, yeah. And I actually got to attend the Congressional Gold Medal event. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to be there and witness that. And that was such an amazing event, just to see history, right? And to see the family members to be recognized for that. But, you've written a book, a little bit about your life and just kind of the things that you've done, and not just the 6888. You're leaving a legacy. You came from service and you've done service and you continue to serve. What is it to you or for you when we talk about impact and leaving a legacy long after we're done?
Well, as I said earlier, you don't know you're making history until somebody tells you that you do. But this 6888, I call it the community. There's so many stories. And what I realized that if you served in the military, and I was on another podcast, and the gentleman mentioned that every veteran is a page of military history, because when you serve, you're serving for a purpose, and you've done something that has contributed to history. You just don't know it unless you tell your story and you step back. And that has resonated with me. And so in terms of a legacy, what I like to think is more of a catalyst for storytelling and helping not only veterans, but their families to realize the impact of that service. Because on a personal level, I'm going through my father's things now that he's died. I mean, he marched in Eisenhower's inaugural parade. Now I see his Liberty Pass. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a snippet of history. And families, the 6888 families now are realizing their family legacy, because a lot of them just didn't know. We just hear this over and over again. Well, my aunt, my mom, my grandmother, I know she served, but she never talked about it. And she just said she served and went overseas and came home. We had no idea of the impact that she made. So the stories are there, and I just think it's important that we all just step back and think about our own military history, our service, or our family's legacy. And every family has a legacy. Every family, when you start engaging in storytelling, you'd be amazed at those stories. And I just believe that we need to find a way within our families. It doesn't have to be a book, but just to capture that legacy, and don't wait until the eulogy to tell that veteran story or that family story.
I love that you just said all of that. As a veteran storyteller, because this is why I podcast, but I've always said this, even when I'm not podcasting, telling your story is so important. Yes. Because it gives breath and space for others to do the same. And you touched upon one particular part of storytelling, how women choose not to share their story. And there's tons of reasons why women don't, and that could be a whole separate podcast. But I think what you said was so important. We need to share. We need to share so that our families, if for not for everybody else, but for our families to know
Right.
the dedication, the sacrifice, and the honor in which they have given for this nation. And absolutely, I loved that you said that. And I love the fact that, you know, whether you're a veteran listening in, especially as a woman veteran, there's so much that can be resonated by with what you just said. Even something is you mentioned earlier as you're talking about how, you know, people didn't want to salute you. And I can clearly remember there are so many times where, regardless of whether I was a lieutenant or a captain, even as a major, there were times that soldiers would dead look at me in the eye and just refuse to salute me. And it wasn't like, oh, I didn't see you. Right. Oh, I know you definitely saw me. You can't miss me. I know I'm 5'1" and I'm super short, but I know you saw me because I walk at you like I'm about to take you out. Yeah. That there was just like this arrogance, like, what are you going to do about it if I don't salute you?
Exactly.
Right? It's just this audacity. And how it doesn't matter the era, we still face that as a woman, that just, I'm just not going to salute you just because I don't want to.
Right. And it went against everything that we were taught in the military. It's you are acknowledging that that's an officer and you're supposed to salute. And that was just that defiance. And like I said, that arrogance. And you cannot fight every day. You cannot chase everyone down who does not salute you. So one thing I learned to pick my battle. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, whatever. And some days I just wasn't in the mood. So it just depended on what day. And I wanted to be consistent, but it's just to the point you cannot fight every day.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So we're gonna shift here. We're gonna do a lightning round. What's the most underrated leadership book or resource you would recommend?
Underrated leadership book. That is a very good question. Underrated. I am really thinking One Woman's Army by Charity Adams, because she encapsulates it all. So I really think that it's a fantastic leadership book, because the 6 AAA is just not about Black women. It's not about Women's Army Corps. It's about solving a logistical issue. It's about navigating a combat environment. It's about connecting families to their loved ones on the front lines, restoring morale, and it's about picking your battles. So I just think that is a good leadership book.
I'll definitely have to check that out. Mm-hmm. What's one habit you keep now that you developed from the Army?
I organize my clothes by color.
Every single person I've talked to will somehow, whether I ask them directly, they'll kind of put that inside the comments about how like discipline and discipline turns into color coordination and by type and by size inside the closet. And I am there with you. You and I are on the same
I don't have the type and size, but I just, and then I learned light discipline in the closet. You hang the pants on the top level, because the pants are more narrow than the blouses, so you let more light in that way. So it's light discipline, organized by color, 100%. Starting with black, and then it goes to the blues, and the last color, I think, are the browns and grays. So,
if you could send one message to your younger version, to the younger version of Edna, what would you say to her?
I would tell the younger version of Edna, depends on which version of young you're referring to, but I'll just start maybe with the second lieutenant, that it's a learning experience and you know more than you think you know, and just a little bit more confidence in your ability. You don't need someone to tell you that you are capable. So I think that's because a lot of stuff, 17, 18, those are hard years, and you're around people twice your age and nobody wants to do anything you tell them, and you're a laughing stock. You're a second lieutenant. You're always, the youngest of this, you're always, that unicorn. But I just think a little bit more confidence.
I agree with that. Mm-hmm. So finish the sentence. Being a woman of war means...
Being a woman of war means that you took a chance on yourself.
I love that. And as we close this and wrap this up, because I mean, I could spend all day talking to you because I could just want to know everything about what you did in your service just because I think that's amazing. What do you want the listener who's in her own storm, her own, woman of war story right now? What would you want her to know from your own story that you reflect upon that could be a learning lesson for them?
I think for me, my learning lesson was to find your it. And what I mean about that is that find something that's only yours. It could be a hobby, but one thing I'll never forget in some leadership course, it was the loneliness of command. There'll be times where you're going to be away from family, loved ones, and you will be the only one. And if you're not good with who you are, and if you don't have something that you can rely on that's all yours, that you don't have to share, it could be a hobby. It could be just, I don't know if it's, working out, because that's all about you. So find something that's yours, because in those times when you are alone and you have no support, no one else to talk to, you can fall back on that, your it, to energize you and to give you that motivation, knowing that, okay, if I can still do whatever that it is that's yours, I think I'll be okay. And for me, it's sleeping. I developed the habit as soon as I retired. I just love to rest and unplug. I mean, I may wake up at 7, but I may not engage until 9, but that's my quiet time. And so I try not to, now that I have the opportunity, I try not to schedule anything before 10. And that's slipping to 11, but that's my it. Along with, I love to write now. I've always been a writer, but, just writing and reading. So just those are my its. I can do it wherever I am. I can sleep. If you name the place, I can fall asleep. So just find your it.
I love that. Mm-hmm. And as you were saying that, I thought about exactly that, the loneliness of leadership, the loneliness of command, mm-hmm. and how it was so hard. And I oftentimes had nobody to turn to. And right. I felt so alone, so lost and at bottom. And if I could have heard that wisdom from you back then, that would have been amazing. So thank you for that nugget. Lastly, where can people find you, follow you, or something about your book?
Okay. Well, my book is A Soldier's Life, a Black woman's rise from Army brat to 688 champion. It's at all major book retailers, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. So yes, that's my story. And what it also does, I share advocacy tips. In other words, if you are 501c3 and you're advocating for something, how to build community, how to get your message across and understand what you are asking for, a clear ask. And my website, ednacummings.com. So I'm on social media. All my links are on my website, ednacummings.com.
Thank you, Edna, so much. I appreciate your spending time with us and just enlightening us with your amazing career and just the work that you've done and just gifting us with the story of 6888.
Okay, well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to Women of War, proudly sponsored by Mill Mentor, where the military community finds its mentors. Until next time, keep showing up, speaking out, and standing strong.